No, not me. Did you say Karen was online?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get started.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Phase 4 Remedial Implementation Plan, Parts 2 and 3, PIP meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to come out. And also thanks to those joining online. My name is Matt Gillis. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for Varian Medical Systems. I'd like to thank the political representation that's here tonight, including Mayor Cahill, who's been a great support in this process. Also here tonight is Representative Paracella. We have Councilor Crowley, and I'm not sure if I missed anybody, but thank you for your support. We have representatives from Mass DEP here, as well as online. And most of all, I'd like to thank the community for taking the time out of their personal schedules to be here. Tonight's meeting is focused primarily on the Phase 4 Implementation Plans Part 2 and 3. And we recognize that there's been a lot of documents submitted, and there's been a lot of meetings related to the former Varian site over the past 2 years. So the document being submitted tonight are associated with the implementation of treatment systems for Building 5, Bedrock, and PSL 10. This is the open field source area. We're also going to provide an update on the other site statuses as well. I'd like to introduce the team members of the technical team that are here tonight. These are the folks who are at the forefront of the design, the feasibility, and the implementation of the various treatment strategies at the site. We have Dr. Jason Cole, thermal remediation expert, Senior Community Outreach Specialist, Amy Brand, Senior Technical Advisor and Chemical Engineer, Carol Mauder, Senior Project Manager, Raymond Carteret. We have Lauren McKinley. Lauren McKinley is a licensed site professional. She's also spearheading the implementation of the Tozer Road Barrier Project. In the audience, we have the registered licensed site professional, Matt Hackman. Say hi, Matt. And we have vapor intrusion expert and project director, Dr. Laurent Levy. Okay, so you see up here we have the agenda for tonight. Laurent's going to take us through the project overview and the Massachusetts contingency plan up to this point of the project. And then Raymond will walk us through the Phase 4 implementation plan for the Building 5 area and bedrock source areas. Carol will then discuss the Phase 4 implementation plan Part 3. This deals with the PSL 10 or open field source area. And then Jason will give us an update on what's currently happening with the site. There's been a lot of activity at the site, and we're excited to talk about it, and Jason's going to run us through that. And then finally, Amy will talk about the next steps and help facilitate the Q&A portion of the program or the presentation. As is typical with the PIP process, the Q&A will focus on this phase of the work and, of course, the work that's been done to date. If you have a really specific question that you'd like to ask, as we always do, we're going to be around after the presentation at the poster boards, and you can ask. We'll stay as long as you want to ask whatever you want. So thanks again for being here, and I will turn it over to Laurent.
Thanks, Matt. So, hi, I'm Laurent Levy. So, Mass DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, ensures the cleanup of contaminated sites in Massachusetts. And they implement this through a set of regulation, which is known as the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, the MCP. And this graphic gives you an overview of the MCP cleanup process. And tonight, we are presenting a Phase 4 remedy implementation plan, so the step in yellow right here, describing the implementation of several of the planned treatments at the site. And the objective of these remedial actions we're going to present is to eventually achieve a permanent solution at the site. And what this means is that we want to continue to demonstrate that there are no significant risk at the site. We also want to remove the contaminant sources to the extent possible, and we want to continue to cut off contaminant concentrations in groundwater. So this shows a map of the site. The former Varian facility is shown right here in yellow. And there were three, this facility was an industrial facility starting in the early 50s. There were contaminant releases that occurred due to historical chemical handling practices, and these contaminants are called volatile organic compounds, VOC. So you're going to hear the term VOC quite often this evening. There were 3 main release areas at the facility. The building 3 area to the north, the building 5 area in the middle, and finally the open field area to the south of the facility. So a couple of things that are important to know. Groundwater generally flows from east to west of the site, so in this direction right here. And what that means is that the VOC, the contaminants, can migrate from the facility. They can migrate in groundwater from the facility to down gradient areas to the west. This is why we have to investigate not just the facility, but areas west of the facility. And then second, this groundwater is not used as a drinking water source. So we're not investigating this groundwater supply as something that is used as drinking water. So last November, we presented the results of our phase 2 assessment.
Thank you.
And the purpose of the phase 2 assessment was to understand what contaminants are present and where, and also evaluate potential risks. And then using established methodology, we determined that there is no significant risk for current workers and residents. And I just want to emphasize why we use the term no significant risk. Significant risk is not a subjective term. It's just a regulatory definition to determine if it's significant. It's not in this case, but if it's significant, then you need to do a cleanup action. So in this particular instance, even though there are currently no significant risk, we still want to implement additional treatment to remove the VOC sources at the facility, and then to continue to reduce the VOC concentration in groundwater. We essentially want to make sure that those risks remain not significant, and that future potential risks are being addressed. Let me click. So to do that, we prepared a phase 3 remedial action plan, which we presented to you last June at the last meeting. And this phase 3 plan, in this phase 3 plan, we proposed treatment action in 6 areas, shown on the map here. The building 3 area, the building 5 area, the open field, the bedrock, the down gradient treatment area along Sohier Road, and finally Stream A near Patton Field. And we're going to talk about these tonight, a little bit more detail. Next slide. So in the phase 3 plan, we selected the treatment technology, and now in the phase 4 plan, we developed and provided the treatment implementation details. So this includes information related to the design, construction, and operation, and it also shows how we will monitor for the treatment effectiveness. So tonight you're going to hear a little bit more detail about some of that. So as you may recall, in June, we not only presented our phase 3, but we also did part 1 of our phase 4 plan for 3 of the treatment areas. So they're shown at the top right here. So in June, we presented about the building 3 thermal treatment. We presented about the Sohier Road permeable barrier. And finally, we talked about the Stream A seep barrier. So we're not going to go into detail with these. We will give you an update, but we're not going to talk about this phase plan part 1. We are moving to the phase, what we're presenting is the phase 4 plan part 2 and the phase 4 plan part 3. So we'll be addressing 3 treatment areas: the building 5 bioremediation, the bedrock chemical oxidation, and finally the open field area treatment zone. So next, I'm going to pass the hand to Raymond, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the phase 4 plan part 2. Thank you.
So as Laurent mentioned, we're going to talk about Phase 4 Plan Part 2 first. We're going to start off with the Building 5 area. In the Building 5 area, we will be implementing bioremediation. That was the selective alternative, and as you might recall from some of our prior discussions, bioremediation involves introducing amendments to the subsurface to help feed microbes that are naturally occurring in the formation. And that amendment is typically something like vegetable oil to provide food for these microbes. And as part of their growth and blooming, they will actually break down the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds in the formation, into non-toxic compounds like gases and chloride. This was a technology that we've applied at the Building 5 area in a limited area, limited depth, and it was promising and showed success in that areas, but we're not done. As part of this implementation, we are going to be expanding that application of bioremediation laterally, different locations, different wells, as well as depths, in addition to different depths. We're also going to be using some different methods to apply the bioremediation additives, pulse injection, to try and get that bioremediation additive out more distributed into the formation. This type of treatment in this area is appropriate for the levels of contamination that we see here, and it has been shown to treat the levels that we see in the Building 5 area. It's an approach that we feel is well suited to being adaptive. In other words, as we complete treatment and collect data, we can adapt that technology to modify it to be focused in certain areas that need more attention and reduce that in other areas. So it's an adaptive technology. And if that means we need to install more wells, we will install more wells. During the time that bioremediation is going to be implemented at the site, we'll continue to operate the soil vapor extraction system, the SVE system. This is a system that's been operating at the site for a long time now. It's been demonstrated to mitigate vapors from potentially getting into the building, and that's going to continue to operate as we move forward. Next slide. So some of the components of the system is what I want to talk about next, and just to kind of orientate people. This is the Building 5 area here. So this is Building 5, our estimated treatment area here is in green. We're going to be using some angled wells that will be installed from outside of the building as a fanned array underneath the building to treat at different depths. And we'll talk a little bit more about those fanned installations. We'll also be installing some vertical wells inside and outside of the building. And these wells will be used to collect some additional data and be part of that adaptive approach in refining the treatment zone. And as I said before, we'll add more wells if necessary based on the data. So we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly how we're going to do that, some of the well installation. But first, before we move on to the next slide, I want to point out in the middle of this slide, you'll see a line. This is what's called a cross-section line. And the next slide is going to look at a slice right down through the building, through the ground, through the bedrock, to kind of illustrate this approach that we're using with these fanned arrays. Next slide. So this is our cross-section that I mentioned. East is on the right side of the screen. West is on the left side of the screen. The Building 5 area is right here. This is the ground surface. This is the soil overburden, top of groundwater. And the colored areas that you see are the estimated areas of contamination underneath the building. So the idea is to install these fanned arrays from outside of the building, under the building, hitting some of the areas where the contamination is located. Those would be wells that we would use for treatment. Some of the wells that are just outside of the areas of heavy contamination, we may just use for monitoring. But we're going to use the data from these wells to focus our treatment as we move forward. So we'll take we'll use these wells to complete tests and add additional wells if necessary. And just to be clear, I'm illustrating two different types of wells here. We have blue wells and green wells. The blue wells, I'm assuming, will be in the contaminated area. Those will be used for injection. We won't be monitoring the results and the effectiveness of the treatment using our injection wells. We'll be using wells outside of the treatment zone to monitor the effectiveness of the treatment. Next slide. So next I'm going to talk about the bedrock area. This is an area that is exhibited by concentrations of elevated VOCs that we see in bedrock wells, two bedrock wells in particular, 54 and 45. It's an area that's located between Building 5 and Building 3. In this area where we will be implementing in situ oxidation, chemical oxidation. And in situ means in place. And chemical oxidation is using an oxidant. And an oxidant is something that will break the compounds down. And if you think about hydrogen peroxide that many of us had in our homes, that's an oxidizer. We're going to be using sodium permanganate, which is a much stronger oxidant, but it's a similar type compound. So we will be using this to address contamination in the fractures in bedrock. And if we've talked about in the past how bedrock's a little different than the soil overburden, where in bedrock, water flows through fractures or cracks in the bedrock. And the key with in situ chemical oxidation is to get that permanganate in contact with the contaminated water. And where we have been able to do that at the site, get the permanganate in contact with the contamination, it has worked well. The trouble has been making sure that contact occurs. So we're going to be doing some different things. And this is an effective treatment for higher levels of contamination or dense non-aqueous phase liquid DNAPL, which is also called residual solvent. So we'll be doing this at some different locations, at some new locations, and using some different methods than we have in the past, one of which will be a push-pull method where we'll inject in one well, extract groundwater from another well to try and pull that permanganate through the fractures and make sure we get that contact of permanganate with the contaminated water. And we'll monitor things as we go along, and if we need to, we will expand the treatment to different areas and different depths or locations. Next slide. The components of the system are relatively simple for this type of a treatment. It's a tank that holds the permanganate. We use a pump to pump it out of the tank and inject it into a well. So you illustrated here, we have a vehicle with a tank on it, pumping from a hose into an injection well. That injection well is set into a fracture zone. Permanganate gets into the fracture zone and treats the VOCs that it comes in contact. During this treatment, we're going to be doing monitoring. We're going to be doing monitoring at non-injection wells to see where we're seeing influence from the permanganate. And that'll include real-time monitoring using field instruments that will help us understand if we're seeing some influence, as well as lab tests that we will collect data, take that back to the lab and test it and evaluate the results. Next slide. So implementing the chemical oxidation in the bedrock area will start with installation of some new bedrock wells. And those are illustrated as yellow dots on this particular figure. So we'll advance those wells down into bedrock. We're going to focus on the top 50 feet of bedrock, but based on tests from those new wells, as well as the existing wells, we're going to focus where our depth is. So after this well installation occurs, we're going to do some geophysical tests, which are tests to try and evaluate the parameters or the physical properties of the rock that we've drilled into. What we're looking to do is see, well, what connections there are in these fractures. Again, fracture flow. We want to make sure we have injection wells that are in the contaminated zones, and it's the same contaminated zones that we see at our monitoring wells. Again, we'll be an adaptive approach similar to what we will do in the overburden in the building 5 area, where we'll let the test data show us where we need to treat, where we need to focus our applications. Once we've done that, we'll install some additional injection wells in key areas that the data shows us needs to be treated. Those are illustrated as green, I believe, green injection wells in this particular figure. So again, it's going to be an adaptive approach based on the data. So that injection will occur, and then we'll monitor and see what the response is and make sure that we're getting effective treatment where we anticipate that we are going to get that effective treatment. And then if necessary, we'll do additional injections or additional injection wells to get the permanganate where it needs to get in contact with the VOCs. And with that, that is Phase 4, Part 2. I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who is going to go over Phase 4, Part 3.
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and next one. Just as a reminder, PSL 10, or the open field, is south of Building 5, which is where we're going to be doing the bioremediation. There were previously in situ chemical oxidation injections that were effective, but we saw some rebound in those down gradient areas. And then therefore in the Phase 3, we said we'll do some additional investigation work and then develop more details of the remedy. So in these next few slides, we're going to talk about the investigation work that we did, the results that we saw, and then talk about a new technology for most of you. It's a subgrade biogeochemical reactor, or SBGR. And I'm going to walk through what an SBGR is, how it's different from the other technologies, and then what it's going to look like for this site. So let's start out with the investigation work that we did. So in August, we did a soil gas survey. A soil gas survey, we go out into the field, put a probe in the ground, withdraw a vapor sample, analyze it for the VOCs, and it gives us an indication of where we might have high concentrations or maybe some source mass. Based on those results, in September, we went out and did some soil borings and monitoring wells, and then based on that, we're doing the design. And we were able to see that in that parking lot area, there was what we would consider some residual source mass that was contributing to those rebounding concentrations. So let's start with the soil gas survey. You can see, hopefully you can see, if not, look on your handouts. There's a bunch of little pink dots. Those were where we were able to collect some soil gas samples. Where you see an X, the soil was too tight. We tried to pull a sample, but we could not get a vapor sample out of it. And we're going to go through the results of PCE, which is going to show up in green. To make it easier to see, the larger the dot, the higher the concentration. And then we'll go through the TCE results in blue. But PCE is the main contaminant that we see in this area. There's only one location that we had really high concentrations. When I saw those results, it's like, okay, there's some source mass there. That's an indication. And then you can see we have some smaller dots that extend out radially. So it's a pretty limited area. And then when we look at the TCE concentrations, we only had 3. They weren't as high, which again is what we would expect. And they showed up, lo and behold, in the same area. Where we had the highest PCE, we also had the highest TCE concentrations. So based on these results, we went out and did 5 soil borings and monitoring wells. They show up in the yellow dots. And you'll notice when we do that, we want to confirm what we saw in the soil gas. So we want to do a sample where we saw the highest concentrations and also where we saw some lower, just to kind of calibrate what do those results mean. And in the soil, we had 3 ranges of concentration. And again, no big surprise, we saw the highest right where we saw it in the soil gas. And the depth that we saw it at was about 13 to 15 feet. We had a couple hundred milligrams per kilogram, which is a high concentration, just above the water table. So that area, if we were to just go and do some in situ bio or in situ chemical reduction, it's harder to do in the vadose zone. So we have a different technique that we're going to be applying here. Next slide. Oh, there's the TCE concentrations. Let's go ahead and move on. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about subgrade biogeochemical reactors. SBGR, and we're going to quiz you on the way out about what all of this is. So this is a technology that Jacobs developed back around 2008. So it's been around for us for a while. We've done about 30 of them across the nation, and they've been very, very effective. What's unique about this is when you find a source mass that is accessible, you go in and you excavate it and dig it out. Usually when you do an excavation, you're just backfilling with clean backfill. But what we do here is instead of putting in clean soil, we're putting in different types of treatment media. And I can talk a little bit about what we use and why we use it, because I think it's really interesting. I don't know if you will or not, but I love talking about it. We backfill with that. We'll be having extraction wells down gradient. We'll extract the water, infiltrate it over this treatment media, and we set up a recirculation cell. So what's unique about it is we have the physical removal of the contaminants in the unsaturated zone, so above the water table. Those go off-site, incineration, landfill, they're handled appropriately. We've got the treatment media. We have biological degradation, which is very similar to what we're going to be doing in the Building 5 area where we're going to be growing the microbes. We also have chemical degradation, not oxidation, but down in Sohier Road where we're using the zero-valent iron, we put zero-valent iron in here as well. So we've got the physical removal, we've got biological degradation, and we've got chemical degradation. So it's also expanding in the aquifer. And I'll show you that on an upcoming slide. So here's a cross-section of it. The brown rectangle that you see, that's the area that we've excavated and we've backfilled with different treatment media. You can see a downgradient extraction well. This little blue thing right there, that is a solar panel. one of the neat features about our SBGRs is we want it to be sustainable. So wherever we could use solar panels, things like that, we like to do that. The water is extracted and then infiltrated over top of the treatment media. The green zone that you see down at the bottom is an expansion of the treatment into the aquifer. So it's not just within that reactive media, because we have some dissolved carbon and things that will go out into the aquifer, and it expands that treatment zone. The photos on the right just show you what it looks like. You know, we're using a bulldozer, we're excavating, we're mixing material on site and putting it back in. We've got our infiltration gallery where we just have some pipelines laid over on top. That's basically what it's going to look like. It's a really simple technology, but it's very, very effective. Next slide. This is a site that we did an SBGR in 2010. It's in California, so it's been operating for a long time, and we've got a lot of data. And what you see is the concentrations drop really, really quickly. The y-axis is a % reduction. That top dot, we had TCE at 182,000 micrograms per liter. That graph, though, is not just about TCE, it's a total VOC, so it's all the degradation products that it forms. They all degraded, you know, within 6 months by about 90% right below the reactor. But the table at the bottom, I wanted to show it's also effective a distance away from the reactor. So 25 feet away, we had over 97% reduction. 100 feet away, we had over 94% reduction. And in fact, at this site, we ended up moving the extraction well further down gradient to expand that treatment zone. So it was very, very effective. Next slide. This talks about what it's going to look like here. So the two orange squares are where we'll be doing some excavation. The one here on the left is just going to be, it's an area that we had some previous indications that there was soil mass in that area, and we're just going to go out there and do some digging, and if we find some elevated concentrations, we're sending them off-site for disposal, and we'll backfill that area with clean fill. The one up here is where we saw the really high concentrations in the soil and in the soil gas samples. So we'll also excavate those areas, but that's where we're going to backfill with the different media. So things that we use in the SBGRs are things like gravel, because that gives us some permeability. We'll add mulch in there, and what the mulch is for is it provides a medium that the bacteria like to adhere to. So if you think of your shower, you've got grout and you've got tile. The bacteria, when you go in, you don't have mold growing on your tile, it's on that grout, right? It gives it something that it likes to stick to. So that's what the mulch is for. We've got ZVI for chemical degradation. We've got, sometimes we'll spray it with some emulsified oil for the carbon source for the microbes. Another thing, we like to incorporate sustainable materials that are from the area. So I've got some sites where there's apple orchards nearby and we've used apples. Or there's a brewery nearby and we use some products from the brewery, some yeast and things like that. In this area, what I'm really interested in is chitin. I don't know if you guys know what chitin is, but it's from crustaceans, so it is going to be shells from lobster, or if you don't understand my accent, lobster, if I'm saying that right. So that's something I'm really interested in incorporating to give it another food source. So it'll be a sustainable approach. We'll have the extraction wells that are shown in blue, and that'll just pump water in through that SBGR, it'll infiltrate, and then you just get this continuous recirculation cell for treatment. Next slide. This gives you an overall schedule for the two parts that we just talked about right now. Spring is going to be really busy for us for both Building 5, the bedrock, as well as the PSL 10 area, with some pre-design investigation and wrapping up design, and then installation in summer, and then full-time operation. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jason, and he's going to walk you through the progress that we've made in some of the other areas.
Entering the home stretch here, so.
Does that make you like Jonathan Papelbon?
I don't know about that. So I'll start off with an update on Building 3 thermal treatment. For those of you that were here for the TAG last month, we talked about a couple of these things, but wanted to give folks a little bit of understanding of kind of where things are and what we're up to. Design is well underway. We've got a contractor from Western Massachusetts out in Gardner, TerraTherm, who's providing thermal services for us. 20 some odd years of the business, really good company. Jacobs has done a tremendous amount of work with them. We've worked on a number of projects collaboratively, and looking forward to delivering this one. And as I said, it's kind of well underway. We had a great meeting with CPI personnel in early September. Much like this, it was a one-on-one session, a lot of discussion back and forth about the types of elements of the remedy moving forward that they're going to see in their spaces, an open forum for them to be able to ask questions about what to see and what to expect. We advanced a couple supplemental borings on the north side of Building 3, in between Building 3 and the boundary of Route 128. This is a really constrained area. It was important for us to understand the northerly extent of contamination that was necessary to be treated with the technology. The data we pulled back and were able to refine essentially the source treatment zone. I can talk a little bit about that in the following slide. We've had a good conversation with National Grid and have developed a strategy to establish a power supply for this system. This heating system will be powered with electricity supplied by National Grid. It's a substantial amount of electricity, and it needed its own service. And then we've got some ongoing renovations on our way with CPI in the stock room. So Building 3 and the additional boring. So over on the right-hand side, you can see we've got a drill rig, and really this additional boring piece was important. This area, there's a small sliver of land between Building 3 and the highway fence, which you can see over there on the right. And really this is the problem. There's 3 overhead utility lines. It's 23,000 volts. It limits what you can put next to the rig safely. We are able, with our partner contractor, to get a specialty rig, a little shorter rig, to get closer into those lines, to grab those confirmation borings, to understand whether or not we actually had to treat up to that 128 fence. We found the soil samples were relatively clean, not indicative of source material, so we were able to kind of bring the northerly extent of our treatment zone back closer to the building, much more aligned with what the historic release points were from our conceptual model. So what you see over here on the left panel is essentially a plan view of the treatment footprint. In the dashed line, that's us looking straight down on what we're to treat. This is Building 3. You've heard the stock room mentioned. That's this area here, and this is what we'll have access to, and it's what we're working to gain access to within the CPI facility. This is where all of our subsurface infrastructure that is necessary to treat below the active operations, which are essentially occurring all the way around this little corner of the building, will be placed in through the floor vertically in the target symbols, and then horizontally in that kind of fan approach, as Raymond mentioned, that we're going to use in Building 5. So each one of these pink lines is representative of 3 or as many as 5 borings on a horizontal angle, proceeding down underneath the depth of contamination and moving to go ahead and overall target heating this zone. And again, if we can picture this plan view, essentially going down to the top of the rock and into the top of the rock surface. So we're heating to a depth of about 60 feet in some places, a pretty large volume of material being addressed from an overall remediation perspective, and looking to extract the contamination which remains in that subsurface zone. Update on the primary power. National Grid, very good meeting. It was very productive. We're working through a strategy now. This is that sliver of land I was talking about. And if you can see, the fence kind of comes in this way and the building kind of comes in this way, and they pinch out to opening maybe a little bit wider than the stage here. So there's not a lot of space as we get into the back. This is the power service, which provides CPI their power. We'll be tapping it with a new pole here, 2 additional poles over here. National Grid is working through the detailed design of that strategy right now. We provided them the mapping. We're going to check back in and see where design progress is in the week ahead, and continue the conversation to push them along and establish that power service into the building to supply our equipment. Update on Sohier Road. So you've heard a little bit about this process along the catcher's mitt we've talked about in prior meetings. This is essentially a down gradient barrier which is going to be put in place to capture contaminants which are moving from the facility, the building 3 area, building 5, and the bedrock down towards Sohier Road. This is a permeable reactive barrier, so it kind of, a lot of terms mixed all in one, but essentially think of it as a fence. As contaminated groundwater moves through the fence, there's a reactionary component, there's a degradation component. A lot of words, microscale, sulfidated, zero-valent iron, and granular carbon. The microscale iron takes care of the decomposition. The carbon is a sponge. It's your Brita filter that you would use to filter out contaminants. So the two of these elements together are capable of capturing that groundwater that's contaminated and preventing it from moving further down into the down gradient reaches and then ultimately recharging stream A. So this is ongoing as we speak. We have investigation activities lined up to begin in December along Sohier Road, where we'll be profiling the hydraulic characteristics and the contamination characteristics along Sohier Road. You may see some rigs out there along that alignment. That data will then come forward back into the office. We'll compile it, put it into a design which will allow us to target those areas of groundwater flow where more contamination may be moving along. Those tools will allow us to assess where are the kind of the contaminant highways, that's what we want to target with the technology, and where are the contaminant low flow zones, which don't really have a lot of risk to perpetuate this down gradient plume. So when we were able to put those two together, we can design the barrier and then essentially come back out through the winter months and into the spring and inject those intermediate compounds down into the ground. And as groundwater approaches it, it reacts with the injected media, the iron, the carbon, and essentially renders the water on the other side treated. And of course, during this operation, we'll have performance monitoring. So that will entail monitoring the groundwater before it hits the barrier and after it hits the barrier to, one, assess for change, to assess for performance of the media, and then of course its longevity. How long will this last, and does it need to be replenished? Do we need to come back out and inject more material to prolong the reaction and keep that plume attenuation moving forward? And then wrapping up with Stream A, some of you down in the area may have gotten a call towards the end of October of ongoing work. I'm happy to say that the Stream A remediation restoration piece is now complete, which entailed the installation of 2 reactive core mats that are shown over here in the left-hand picture. If you can look up over here in the little inset here, again, we're relying on that trapping characteristic of granular activated carbon, your Brita filter concept. We have groundwater that's kind of recharging, kind of moving out of the bank into the creek surface. As that water moves through, it hits that fabric, the contaminants are absorbed, and then essentially we have reactive material and a stone cover over the top of that fabric to keep it in place. So what you see here are the stones over the top. That stone is kind of an erosion wear layer, prevent the material and particularly the filter from washing out during a rain or a flood event or a high water event. And the rock essentially keeps that material from falling down into the stream. So those are in place. We took a look at those this afternoon. We'll have monthly inspections of those for the first 6 months and then look to go into some periodic inspections after heavy precipitation events. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of run through the milestones of where things are overall. And so looking to building 3, detailed design is moving through its process. It has been an iterative process as we've worked through the spatial constraints that we have both with the site and the evolution of the source area and how much material we can actually treat to the north. System installation starting the first week in December 4, we begin drilling operations. There's about a 90-day duration set for the outdoor drilling pieces. Once that's complete, we're moving operations inside of the building and working within the constraints of the CPI structure to continue the build out. We're looking to start up towards the end of the summer. The CPI facility move is ongoing. It's kind of a shell game. We've got 3 individual moves that are taking place while we're trying to allow them to do what they do and make their components and keep their operations moving. So it's been an ongoing game of of moving and progressing design concepts and construction elements. The Sohier Road barrier remedial assessment is underway. We'll be out in December to probe along Sohier Road and then construct this winter. That barrier will be up and running well before the treatment system is up and running. Again, we talked about that barrier kind of being the catcher's mitt, and we're on schedule and track to make that happen. And then Stream AC installation completed last month, and now we're into a long-term monitoring phase. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and I'll let Amy wrap things up for us today.
Thanks, Jason. So I just want to just talk about where we are in terms of what's for public review. We've covered a lot of treatment areas tonight. So again, just a reminder that tonight's meeting is focused on the Phase 4 Remedy Implementation Plan, Parts 2 and 3. So Part 2 focuses on Building 5 and the Bedrock area. Part 3 focused on the PSL 10 area. Those are the three areas we presented at the beginning, and that's what's available for public comment right now. You can see copies of those reports. There's hard copies, or a hard copy at the reference desk at the Beverly Public Library. And there are also copies online on the Mass DEP website. Next slide. So the public comment period, technically it starts tomorrow. If you make comments tonight, we will be happy to accept them. And it runs through December 4th. And we have comment sheets at the welcome table. You can also submit comments online through our website, and the address is there, or email sent to Raymond, or you can mail comments to us, either the comment form or a letter, whatever you would like, to our physical address. Again, we're focused on parts 2 and 3 for the public comment period. So that's the Building 5 area, the Bedrock area, and PSL 10. So we also gave you an update on the other 3 areas, but we presented those in the part 1 of the Phase 4, which was in June, and that's why we're moving forward with implementing those. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions. So I am going to ask folks to use the microphone. We may be able to hear each other okay in the room, but we want to make sure that folks online are able to hear us. And also, as a reminder, Matt told us at the beginning of the meeting, we record these and we post them on our website. So we want to make sure that should anybody be choosing to listen to the recording online, that they're also able to hear. So, questions?
This is just a quick question about the Building 5. On the monitoring wells that you're going to be installing on angles, I don't know if this has been spelled out explicitly, but are you guys putting these at different depths? Are you going to be packering the wells, or is it just single wells with screens at different zones on the angled sampling?
So I think it could be different. I think it could be different at different locations. So, and it'll depend on the installation method. So like the really flat horizontal wells are going to be individual packered wells. We may put some nested wells in the sonic wells that are put at steeper angles. So it's going to be a mix of things. And we're going to be looking to our drilling professionals to, give us that option of what makes the most sense for hitting the right intervals. And those intervals will be based on screening data. And we are actually going to be doing some 24-hour sampling of certain areas to make sure we hit that right area to screen the wells.
Additional questions? Mayor Campbell?
Thank you. Mayor Mike Cahill, thank you for the presentation. As we've talked about in the recent TAG meeting and hearing you folks again tonight, lots to be encouraged about, and we appreciate that. We know in the past with some of the treatments that there's been rebound, and you talked about, Raymond, as you were presenting, talked about rebound. Could you just share a little bit more as a team how you're going to monitor that, how you're going to be able to be nimble, and what are some of the things based on the work that you've all done, because you have a lot of experience, that we might expect, and or how is some of this calculated to kind of overwhelm or prevent against the rebound that we might worry about?
So I guess I'd start by saying, yeah, we do expect to see rebound. That's very common in lots of remedial approaches. And the idea is that we're monitoring that rebounding, seeing where it's occurring, and focusing our attention on those areas, and understanding, how does it fit in with our conceptual site model? And if it isn't fitting in with our conceptual site model, maybe there's some additional assessment work or additional points we need to put things in. But there's a lot of parts that go to that, as far as monitoring. It's making sure we're monitoring at locations that will tell us, how is this performing? Is this a good location to say, if I'm treating here, I'll see it here? And if it isn't, then we need to look at a different location. So there's a lot of pieces to it. And like you said, it's a lot of years of experience that we have as a group and individually. I don't know if, Carol?
Yeah, I'll jump in. One of the other things that we like to look at is the seasonal variability. So, for instance, in times where you've got a lot of, say, rainfall, we want to see how do the groundwater concentrations change. So if after the water table rises after a lot of seasonal rainfall, if our concentrations go up, that tells us there's some additional source mass there in the, a little more shallow that we've got to go after, and then maybe we would change and do some shallow injections to hit that area, if it's something like in the in situ bio area. For the SBGRs, we really don't see rebound in that type of a situation. If we find, and I don't expect this, but if we were to see concentrations not decreasing in certain areas, then you can supplement it with some EVO injections or some additional bio outside that area. I don't anticipate that need, but that is something that we could do.
I would say along the same line, for the thermal remediation areas, again, that subject of rebound is not typically something that we would experience, because the nature of the technology is such that you're forcing extraction of the contamination. And I've used the analogy a couple times, again, about the sponge. And you have a certain amount of times that you can wring the sponge to be able to drive it to drain water out of it. And a thermal remediation technology really works the same way. We would use data and observations, a lot of data. These technologies run 6, 9, 12 months, that's it. And then essentially that data collection is focused over a much tighter bandwidth so that you can essentially emulate that wringing of the sponge. We can do that a couple times very quickly on our hands and know we're not going to get any more water out of the sponge. And our data collection efforts of mass contaminant extracted with time is exactly the same principle of you squeezing over and over and over. And again, as we look to track that data with time, it essentially tells us we're at the end of the end of the line for the technology, and it's ready to transition to a polishing strategy, which we've talked about, the bioremediation and other types of supplemental treatment, which will be present, along with this multi-component remedy that's been established for the site. Uh-oh. I knew a hard one was coming.
You asked me to think of a question for you.
Okay.
So, relative to this, the analogy that you just gave and squeezing the sponge, even with the other remediation types afterwards, potentially to follow after all of your squeezing, I wish to change the analogy a little bit, right? If what's in my sponge is like mold, and I don't really get it all out, then that mold could regrow, and then that's in my brain, the rebound. So can you speak to that, like the source of these bad chemicals maybe was a dumping however many years ago, and so there is no expectation of a rebound? Or is there a potential that whatever was in there after we squeeze the sponge as much as we can? I love, by the way, all our little Britas and our sponges, very understandable for a normal non-chemical engineer. After we do all that squeezing, is it possible that a rebound could happen?
For the thermal, generally not, because what it has done, everything in life in the world wants to be in equilibrium. You don't have systems, chemical systems in particular, that are out of balance. And what we're doing by squeezing the sponge or by heating the ground is we're forcing the chemical system out of balance. And by out of balance, it drives the removal of the contamination, whether that be the pressure of you squeezing the sponge or the application of heat to the ground and the extraction of the contaminants from the subsurface. Now, once that is done and each of them have hit their endpoint, you're right, there could be a little bit of mold left in your sponge. That contamination is present at a residual threshold and it will equilibrate. But what you tend to see is that in the case of the thermal remedy, the heat that's left behind, the degraded organics that are left behind because they're naturally present in the soil, heating the soil up. It hasn't been this hot since dinosaurs walked this earth, well before the glaciers, all that other business. So you're taking soil, you're heating it, you're making a little bit more organics, and you're providing those conditions that are ideal for microbial organisms to continue to degrade and break down that process. And as a result, that residual, the mold left in the sponge, often breaks down with it.
I want to add to that on the thermal. When we do our injection technologies, when you inject something, it's going to go for those super highways, right? So if you think of highways and little streets, a lot of it goes through those super highways. And that's when you can tend to see a little bit more rebound because it's the cars that over time are going to start to come out from those little side streets that were not treated. With thermal, though, you equally treat those little side streets as well as the super highways. So you're nuking all those little cars at the same time. So you see a lot less rebound with the thermal because of that, because you have equal treatment of the tight pores as well as the large, more open ones.
And I think that speaks back to the general effectiveness of the technology as a class of remediation solutions. It doesn't care whether the soil is gravel, bedrock, silt, clay, and relative to those highways of where the contaminant may be resident. Heat moves almost uniformly in the subsurface, regardless of what type of material you're heating, clay or sand or gravel. And as a result, the heat is what's driving that extraction process. So you tend to see a lot less spotty nature of highway versus side street. And the highway versus side street is really the root challenge of back diffusion, which is the process which causes quote unquote rebound.
I want to, did that answer your question and make sure everybody understood that and we didn't speak too much in analogies and you're like, what are they talking about with sponges and highways? And if I want to just make sure that everybody followed that. If you didn't, don't be shy to raise your hand and say, well, could you just try that again? And that goes with any of our responses, whether we're speaking only in analogies or only in technical terms. Other questions? In the back?
Yeah, so as a follow-on to all of this, what I'm getting out of this is that we have three major source areas, and we are physically removing under 3, and we are physically removing in the field, 1 by heat under 3, and actually physical removal of the really bad stuff, the really high concentrations. In the middle, we're not doing that. We're not having a physical removal. We're having biodegradation, bioremediation. And so I gather from that if we're going to see a rebound, we're going to see it in Building 5. We're probably not going to see it for thermal for the reasons you talked about, or in the field, because we're actually physically removing the material. We're just not doing it for lots of reasons for 5. So if we do have a rebound problem, that's where we're going to see it. And so from a comparison of the concentrations that we are aware of for those 3 areas, how does 5, compare to 3 in the field? So we can get some sense of, okay, the rebound is probably going to be in that area, and how does it compare to the other 2?
So speaking on the thermal side in Building 3, the soil concentration is several hundred parts per million, so milligrams per kilogram. It's fairly concentrated. It's consistent with what Carol has seen in PSL 10, that really hot boring at 297. We see very strong source signature in building 3. Building 5, Raymond, maximum of 20 milligrams per kilogram. So an order of magnitude lower concentration from building 5. Much lower source signature for these particular types of contaminants. So I do agree with you. The sense of the building 5 bedrock combination of there not being a physical removal strategy being applied, it will come back to an observation basis, as Raymond indicated. It's going to be apply a substrate, apply an oxidant, monitor the system. Are we seeing the desired performance or not? And if we're not, then how do we pivot and alter to drive the desired performance from those units?
But it is an order of magnitude difference,
Absolutely.
which kind of justifies the kind of different approaches.
Right. Go ahead.
I would much rather be applying thermal treatment in an open
do it everywhere.
in an open field versus below, the buildings, just from logistics and time frame, and everybody would get to see something a lot sooner. And I have pictures of the site actually being heated. I don't have those yet. We're going to have those as the wintertime and we continue to get together and discuss progress. But in this particular case, it's shallow enough, and the contamination is a excellent fit for the SBGR strategy.
And I just wanted to add to that, it's not only the concentration that's a little different in the PSL 10 area, it's the area that's, there's one boring that, it's a very defined area, whereas under building 3, we have multiple locations. So it's level and its extent. And access, it's a parking lot, we can get in there and physically remove it. It's the best way to do it. The other 2 are under buildings. And as Jason alluded to, that building 5 approach, but bio approach is an adaptive approach. So we can focus on that rebound where we see it.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate all of the updates and refinements. So my question is really just as implementation ramps up with all of these new strategies that people may not have seen before or seen in these particular spots, what people who are living or working nearby might expect, so that we can also help communicate out to people, here's what this will look like that you shouldn't worry about, or if you see the rocks moving along the seep, you should let somebody know. So just sort of what that might look like, what might be disruptive, even though it's helpful and we're happy for that short-term disruption, especially over these next few months.
I get to answer a question. So my role as a community outreach specialist is to help facilitate that conversation with the community. And on the seeps, we were out there working, but we started to get some calls, and we worked with Mayor Cahill and Jocelyn, and we will be making more use of Beverly's phone system when there's going to be work in an area, so that residents will know that work is going out. We also have on the table tonight, we have a fact sheet that is literally hot off the presses. We have not yet mailed it out, but we will be mailing it out to the area, especially down gradient of the site. We'll also be putting copies at the library, and if we can, also at City Hall, for people to be able to pick those up. And it also helps drive people to our website, which we're going to be updating more frequently with more information about what's going on in the field and with photos, that kind of thing. Matt, I don't know if you want to add.
Just to piggyback off of what she said, we had a really good conversation at the last TAG meeting with the entire group, but about ways that we could, if there's upcoming work that does require some notification. For instance, we did some work where we were required to wear some Tyvek suits. It wasn't because we were dealing with hazardous chemicals, it was poison ivy. But for the public, if they see that, they automatically think, am I in danger? And that's, obviously that's a serious concern. So it's a valid point. And so she mentioned the robocall. And, the majority of this work is going to be taking place on the CPI property. So we're constantly communicating. I mean, we have weekly calls with the CPI folks. So that's the primary focus of where it is. But there are clearly some aspects, maybe it'll be seen from the road. So we certainly offer any recommendations on how best to communicate that as well.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
I feel like you probably answered this question for me before, but maybe it'll be good to hear it here. We understand that the thermal remediation, once it does start, is a several month to a kind of max out around a year process. I don't know about the, oh gosh, I'm not looking at the page, but wait a minute, biogeochemical. There you go. So there are three different pieces to this, right? And so we understand where the rebound most likely will happen is around building 5. So what should we expect for kind of a life cycle for each of these three different, arms of the treatment in the three different places?
So I'll start on the thermal side because it's the shortest window really of them all. From an operational perspective, once the system is constructed, 9 months to a year is about typical for these remediation systems. And again, we're using monitoring data to drive the decisions of when that endpoint is. When do we transition the remedy to allow the site to cool a little bit and to take advantage of that residual heat and drive microorganisms to be able to grade kind of residual contamination, so to speak.
And remind us when from that slide you're looking at the work starting, the install being complete and the work starting?
So the install will be starting the first week in December. We will begin to prepare the outside reaches of the building that we can access now. There's some earthwork that needs to be done there. There's some old wells that need to be abandoned. There's some shrubbery that needs to be removed. And then that will set up a drilling campaign, which will run about 90 days to install all the outdoor elements of the vertical and horizontal borings. Once that's complete, that should start to line up with our ability to begin to get into the CPI facility and into the stockroom. Really, the linchpin on this has been moving the individual components within the building to not impact their operations, but to give the thermal remediation team access to the stockroom, because that's really the only way that we can get out into those other areas, which are under one-of-a-kind manufacturing and chemical treatment type operations. So that is the schedule as it sits right now, looking to have the system operational summer timeframe, late summer, maybe early fall. We're still shifting schedule-wise based on where the CPI move and access is coming in, and we're still sequencing the ability to look at a couple of different strategies to accelerate the build of the system within the constraints that we have to work around, and noise and disturbance to CPI operations and things along those lines. So we're going to start to have a better idea of what that timeline looks like as we get into drilling on site-specific conditions and how long each of the holes are taking us. But that starts the first week in December.
And so what degree of confidence do you have that we're looking there at mid-fall next year for beginning of an up to 1 year of actual thermal treatment? Confident in getting to the start line by mid-fall next year?
I'm going to do my best to make certain that happens. This project is very unique, and I've talked about that, and I hopefully don't want the audience to think that we're just saying that it's unique. There are a lot of very, very complicated elements of developing this well field design and implementing it into a space where we really don't have a lot of area to work. And I hope at some point in time in a future meeting, we can sit down, whether it's the tag, and show you some of the three-dimensional strategies of what this problem looks like in real time. And it's dizzying, to be very honest with you, when you try to look at utilities and building footers, and you can't get here because this supplies electricity to the entire facility, let alone getting a large piece of drilling equipment in to work around that material safely and confidently. So yes, I want to say that the system is going to be operational in the summertime and the fall, and I don't want the schedule to move anywhere beyond that. But we're just starting to get into the field now, and I think as our meetings and our time frame progresses, we'll have a much better idea to continue to update status. And it's a conversation that we want to have with you and be entirely transparent about where we are and how much progress we're making with respect to implementing that remedy. It's important to the overall site specifics, and it's important to Varian to produce the remedy and bring it forward so we can address this source and move on to others that are present and deserving of attention. And now I'm going to let Carol talk a little bit about.
Listen, I think we all appreciate the candor, and we feel the urgency.
Yeah,
Both.
absolutely.
Okay. So as far as duration of operation, next to thermal, I'd say the SBGR is going to be the fastest. We typically see results very quickly right nearby, and I would expect that's going to operate for a couple of years. The nice thing about that system is continuing to operate is no big deal. It's really just the solar powered pump that can continue to recirculate. So if that has to operate longer, again, no big deal. So I expect to see results for that area within the first couple of years. The bio under Building 5 and the ISCO are going to be longer. I know before at a previous meeting you were kind of pushing to say, when is it going to be done? When is it going to be done? It's going to be years out. We've got to inject, monitor, see how it's behaving, see where it's going. We may have to add some injection wells or do some extraction in one area and re-inject in another area. We're just going to have to wait and see. But those two are going to be longer.
Carol, as a reminder, when you said the ISCO, that's the bedrock near Building 3.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So the bio under Building 5 and
Yep.
bedrock that she was just talking about.
Well, I think the bio and the chemical oxidation are both going after the same area, are they not?
They're nearby.
Yeah.
So the
Different depths.
yes.
Different depths. That's why you have two different treatments, right? But could you talk for a couple minutes then, because none of us want to hear that it's going to be years. Could you talk about the catcher's mitt then? Because I think it's important. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to lead you, but the catcher's mitt is so that stuff doesn't migrate off-site like it has been for years.
That's right, that's
While
right.
the rest of this is happening. Could you
That's
just
right.
share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, and I want to reemphasize something that Laurent mentioned early on is there is no risk, right, from the standpoint of exposures to people. And we're knocking down the source areas to make sure there is no future risk. And a piece of the overall strategy is while we're remediating these source areas, because we know things can shake up and migrate, we've got that catcher's mitt along Sohier Road. So if while we're drilling there was some concentrations that started to migrate, we've got that catcher's mitt in along Sohier Road that's going to keep contamination from migrating beyond there and protect that down gradient area.
And I just wanted to add, we also continuing, while all of this proceeds, we're continuing with the groundwater monitoring program. And in fact, we are in the process of doing our a semi-annual event this month in the beginning of December, and that will continue every 6 months with the usual network of wells, and we'll adjust based on the monitoring, on the remediation progress.
So does anybody else have a first question they haven't asked before we go to round 2? Or 3 or 4, whatever it is. Go ahead.
Laurent, in the beginning, you talked about the technical definition of significant risk, and then you just said, oh, maybe something will change. So I want to ask about, if there is not a significant risk, why is it that there's remediation being done in one of the households? And a follow-on question is, a closely related question is, what about the houses that you tried to address that didn't like answer you. They didn't maybe answer the door, or they chose not to talk to you, right? In general, if there was no risk, then why does there need to be remediation in some number of houses?
So I can answer for the house where we conducted some mitigation. I can confirm there was no significant risk. And what that meant is we collected sample of the indoor air, and each time we collected the sample, we were below a certain number that is in regulation indicated we need to take action. So there was no significant risk because we were not exceeding that number. However, we kept getting low-level detections, and by having this low-level detection, which are, low, we felt that we would have to continue monitoring, and that perhaps instead of continuing monitoring and coming every 6 months, we felt that perhaps we should go ahead and put a system preemptively to reduce the level and to eliminate the potential concerns. So we decided, although there were no risk at that property, no significant risk, per the regulations, we decided to go ahead and install a mitigation system to prevent that from happening. With respect to the houses where we were knocking and we didn't get a response, should mention that in one of the prior meetings, we did have a resident said, well, we wanted, they were on Longview Terrace, if I recall, and they said, we wanted to have some sampling done, and that never happened. And we immediately scheduled that sampling event, and I think we did that this winter, collected subslab soil gas, so a sample under the slab of the house, and we collected indoor air sample. And in this particular case, there were no concern whatsoever. So it was essentially case closed on that. And if there were other properties, we'd be happy to go ahead and sample, review the records that we have, and be happy to repeat that.
And just to follow up with Laurent's first discussion is there was no significant risk, but in Massachusetts, there are some screening levels that the Mass DEP has established that, in simple terms, is kind of like a background. So it's something that in a home, DEP likes us to take some active measures to address, even though there is no significant risk. So it's a little more than just, we thought it would be good to do this. Because it's above that screening level, because you have to, there are these chemicals in background products, in household products. So Mass DEP has set these levels. They're called screening levels, or they're actually called,
I'm drawing up.
What are they, Steve?
threshold values. Screening levels are for soil gas. They're threshold values. And it's kind of a between number, between what's considered background by Mass DEP and significant risk. In a residential situation, Mass DEP expects that there's some action taken to address those levels above the threshold value. And just to reiterate what Laurent said, if there are homeowners that want tests completed, we can certainly take a look at those situations. I mean, we can't make people complete tests in their homes if they choose not to respond to our inquiries. And if DP is contacted and wants a home sampled, we can talk about that.
Perhaps we could use yet another analogy is imagine you have a green light, orange light, and red light. And significant risk would be past that red light. Well, let's say that home probably had a light orange light, and we decided not to wait for that light to become red. And we didn't want to continue sample. We figured, let's go back to green.
Right.
We also, when we look at this, we want homeowners to be comfortable. So we have a discussion with the homeowner, and we want to make sure that they're at ease. I mean, I don't know, I can't share the exact details of the extent of that conversation, but that's a priority for us. We don't want people to feel like they're not safe in their home, certainly. So that was a consideration too in that decision.
Other questions? No, there are no questions. Anybody, I did type in there, if anybody online has any questions, now is the time to type quickly. But I've been watching for them, and I typed in there, please type in your questions, and don't see anything yet. Okay, so we are happy to talk to you in here or at the posters, especially on the schedule. All 6 of these are on one poster, which might make that easier if you want to talk about that. Please, I encourage you to pick up a copy of the fact sheet, pick up a few copies if you want to share it with folks. Like I said, we will be getting that out in the mail, and we'll be leaving copies for the library and City Hall. It provides a high-level overview of what the plan is for each of the 6 treatment areas. And we look forward to future meetings, especially as we start to report back more and more on what's happening in the field. As a reminder, I'm going to page back to the comment period information. So again, just a quick reminder, Phase 4, Part 2, that's Building 5 and the Bedrock area. Part 3 focuses on the PSL 10 or open field area. Those are what's available for public comment right now. Public comment period starts now and runs through December 4th. And you can submit those comments online, email to Raymond, mail it to us. There's comment forms out in the lobby. So with that, thanks everybody for coming out. I really appreciate it. Have a nice night. Drive home safely. Thank you. Oh, and please eat cookies and coffee. There's plenty.